This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
Make your destination postcard vivid with here's the problem we're solving, here's our hypothesis as to the future state, and then here's the journey we're on. We're testing it, or we've proven this, or we're adjusting. If being short and concise, and then your job is to be the chief repeating officer, the CRO, right? Again and again and again.
This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by John Rossman. John is the founder of Rossman Partners, a strategy and leadership solutions firm. He is the author of 4 books on leadership and business innovation, including the bestseller, The Amazon Way and Big Bet Leadership. He was an early Amazon executive who played a key role in launching the Amazon Marketplace business back in 2002. Today, he is a leading keynote speaker on leadership for innovation and transformation. John is an operator and a builder whose love is diving into business problems and customer needs, designing innovative solutions and business models, and creating durable enterprise value. His latest book, Big Bet Leadership, Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyper-Digital Era, is an actionable playbook for senior leaders to succeed at complex transformation. I'm excited to have him on the show to learn more about the leader's role in these transformations. So, John, welcome to the show.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me on Deep Leadership.
Oh, it's an honor to have you, sir. And I'm kind of interested in this subject. And of course, your background in history with Amazon will be unique for our listeners to hear a little bit about the sort of insider stories of Amazon as we go through this discussion. But first of all, let's dive into this book. I have it in front of me. It's called Big Bet Leadership, and you can't miss it. It's got a beautiful cover. I love the colors, by the way. And it's called Big Bet Leadership. Tell us about this book. Tell us about your co-author and what inspired the two of you to write this particular book.
Yeah, so my co-author is Kevin McCaffrey. Kevin was part of an enterprise strategy team at T-Mobile, and he had specific accountabilities for running new business incubation. So this would be new businesses, new value propositions, new products, new customers beyond the core T-Mobile experience. I had the opportunity to serve as the senior innovation advisor for 3 years. And what we did was we built a practice and a set of techniques and leadership playbook and operating model for how T-Mobile was going to explore a set of themes that they believed they should invest in and build, plant the seeds for tomorrow's businesses. And it was through that experience that we took a lot of the Amazon playbook, especially kind of these notions about starting with the end in mind, working backwards, writing memos, and having deep debate about these topics and being more thoughtful with constraints up front about experimenting on these ideas and then working them through our pipeline with really good governance. And on one angle, Big Bet Leadership is the story of many of the things that we learned at T-Mobile, and then all of the things that across my 35 plus year career at Amazon, at the Gates Foundation, at T-Mobile, at a number of other clients, and Kevin as a senior strategy leader at Google and T-Mobile, of how to make complex change happen in an organization. So a big bet is fundamentally any type of strategy or plan that has 2 attributes. First is it has the potential for high impact to the business. And secondly, it has many risk factors, dependencies, and unknown unknowns about it. And the only way to get through these things is to have the right leadership operating model relative to them. And that's where the story starts. We all know that all of these types of complex initiatives, there's an extremely high failure rate. But the real wicked problem is like, but we need to do more of them, right? Like the competitive edge is extremely short-lived. And so on one hand, 70 to 80% of these fail. And those are the errors of commission where an action was taken. That doesn't count the errors of omission where a major transformation was needed but wasn't taken. So these are needed, but they're going to fail. Well, I think that's a situation that needs innovation. And so we worked for and learned from 4 big bet legends, leaders who haven't succeeded once, but multiple times at the table of making major transformations. So those big bet legends are Jeff Bezos, who I worked for, Elon Musk, John Ledger from T-Mobile, and Satya Nadella. And what we concluded, the way we framed it, was these leaders do 3 things differently than other really good operating leaders, right? What they do on forcing and succeeding at the table of big bet transformations is they create clarity, they maintain velocity, and they accelerate risk and value. And so the whole book is an operating model, a set of tactics to help senior leaders and the teams that serve senior leaders do a better job at delivering against those 3 habits.
This is fantastic. It's really important the point that you bring up as far as like organizations making a big bet, making a big significant, putting all in on a particular idea or strategy. And one of the things that's interesting is I imagine there's a cultural component to it as well. So companies that are willing to take a big bet, because I think I worked for a number of companies that were conservative in terms of approaches, right? So they would only do incremental things. They weren't taking the big bets. And so I think a lot of companies once you've reached some level of success, they're worried about losing what they have, so they're not willing to take big bets. So is there a cultural element to those companies that are willing to take those big risks?
Well, you pack in a lot into that relatively simple question that is really important that I want to highlight. The first is, although the name of the book is Big Bet, the big is the ambition, it's the potential. We're actually we are against actually making big bets. The whole goal is to de-risk these strategies before you make big commitments. And so some of the biggest and most famous failures, and we talk about a couple in the books, are where they do things completely backwards, which is they make big commitments up front. They suffer from ambiguity and a lack of clarity as to the problem they're solving and the hypothesis as to the future state. And then they proceed on this journey to nowhere that gets to be very long and expensive. And those are glamorous failure cases. And so, Jeff Bezos does not believe in actual bet the enterprise bets. What he believes in is making calculated moves about exploring future new markets and major opportunities and doing that in a very systematic way. And that's what this book is a systematic way to battle these 2 competing objectives. One is how to achieve the ambition, but the second is how do we de-risk it? Because there's nothing better for a career than being the leader or being associated with a big bet that wins. But there's also nothing more dangerous for a career than being associated with a big bet where you do things wrong. And so we really wrote this book for the people that are in the trenches executing against these major transformations. So I don't know if I got to the essence of your question. Can you restate the
I think you're getting
question?
to it, but
Okay.
I do think there's an element to it that
you asked about culture.
The element of it. Yeah.
One of my clients read the book and he goes, "Oh, what's interesting about this, John, is that it is both a strategy book, like how do we think, how do we position ourselves differently, but it's also how we work. So much of the book is about the operating model, how we work together to execute against these. And if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, and you use the word correctly, which is a big bet is distinctly and fundamentally different than an incremental project. An incremental project is something that we understand well, and as long as we execute, we kind of know the range of return and everything. A big bet is fundamentally different. But the major mistake people make all the time is they apply the same project management and approaches and operating models of incremental projects onto fundamentally something that has to be a set of experiments that we do. That doesn't work. And then the other thing that you mentioned was around culture was conservative companies. Well, the conservative companies, one of the things that conservative companies tend to be very focused on is legacy and stewardship.
Yeah.
So much of this philosophy is about not just optimizing for today's business, right? The Horizon 1 business, but deploying enough attention and enough resources to help be building the Horizon 2 and the Horizon 3 businesses,
Yeah.
the new use cases, and to continue to improve our productivity and our execution and the major jumps in capability that our company needs to do in order to stay competitive within our current offerings. And so conservative companies, if they actually understand the long risks in their business, the major risk is not taking enough big bets, and all they do is incremental moves. And so I've actually been so successful in working with private companies that have incredible stewardship mindsets and helping them understand how to, relative to their culture and their business and where they're positioned to play, what's the appropriate amount to deploy relative to resources? And it doesn't have to be a lot to really test and learn and then be bringing forward these next new businesses for their business. And that is how you create a durable, long-lasting business with a competitive edge relative to its competition.
I absolutely love that, because I was just thinking as you were talking, it's almost like the companies that don't take the big bets are the ones that we read about, like the Sears and the Kmarts and they're just sort of falling by the wayside. Or you see
The
companies
same,
trying to play catch up. Yeah.
the same client that read the book, he said, "Oh, this book is the cure for the innovator's dilemma," right? The innovator's dilemma is the company that was a scrappy startup at one
Yes.
point. They found product market fit. They developed a big business, but now they have both lost the ambition and the skill set of how do we actually innovate and explore into a new market. And so, that is exactly what we've solved for, is kind of that trap that good companies fall into, which is, generally, summed up as a short-term perspective, short-termism, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm 8 years into my company startup, and so we're at the point where it's more about execution and less about the innovation anymore. Like we found our niche, we found the customers we like us, we found a business model that makes money, and so we're like, oh, okay, we've arrived, right? And so we get a little comfortable in those little spaces, but we're in a world of change, right? Everything is shifting dramatically more than any time in our lifetime, right? So we can't sit still, because what's going to replace the products that we have? What's going to replace the business model that we put out there, right? And that's the kind of thinking that we have to have. And I love the idea of those that don't take the big bet are more likely at risk than those that do.
So the subtitle of the book is Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyperdigital Era. What's the hyperdigital era? So the preface of the book lays out exactly the thesis that you're talking to, which is, and I'll sum it up in 10 seconds, which is, if you think the past 25 years of digital transformation and change has been interesting, it will pale in comparison in the next 25 years. And I think there's three mega forces, with technology being just one of them, that are going to create a chaotic environment where leaders who know how to take advantage of those mega forces and have the willingness and the technique to actually explore into new businesses and to rethink their operating models will be the winners. And those that hold on tightly to today's practices and today's businesses and today's organization structures and today's view on productivity are going to be challenged. And that's why we wrote the book, is because we think it's vital for America in so many ways to have small and mid-sized companies who have a great product and a great fit and a great set of customers to be able to innovate and transform as well as any of the big companies out there. And there are distinct advantages that small and mid-sized private companies have, and you have to use those advantages. Um, um, and I think that they're bountiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, I mean, often talk about like small companies can get out on the thin ice where the big companies can't, right? And so we can move a little quicker. We're a little more agile. We can experiment with things quicker, and the risk is lower when we do things. So
And
yeah,
you can
yeah,
and you can oftentimes bring your customers along as a key partner
yeah.
in the innovation and in the trials and everything, right? And so yes, you have all those things going for you.
Yeah, I love that. So talk to us a little bit about the experimenting stage of this when you're throwing out a big idea and you're having that opportunity to just vet that idea and having the back and forth. What's that look like?
Yeah. So Amazon's core operating approach and innovation approach is called working backwards, and it focuses on starting with the end in mind and then working backwards. And what it features is writing memos and debating, getting to clarity, which means both simplicity and completeness of thought relative to a topic. Most companies are not equipped to take on that memo writing experiment. So in Big Bet Leadership, in the first two chapters in particular, which is called Thinking and Outcomes and Play Chess Not Checkers, we reverse engineered and prescribed a much more tailored approach to how to take the principles of this Amazon working backwards approach to write the memos and debate them, to help create the essential framework for the book, which is a big bet vector. A vector has 2 points on it, right? The first point on a big bet vector is, what is the problem in very specific terms with the real what sucks known about it that we are trying to solve? And the other point of the vector is our hypothesis as to the future state and the killer feature that creates that point. And if you have those two things, then you're set up for success across the whole journey of testing and proving out this big bet vector, this hypothesis for the future state. So that is the very first construct that needs to be put in place. And it sounds like hard work, this memo writing, debating, tuning, debating, creating alternatives, having a portfolio. And it is, but it is actually the best and the cheapest and the safest type of actual experimentation that you can do. I liken it in the book to Einstein, and when he would do thought experiments, right? That is essentially what we're doing on a team basis, but forcing yourself to write these out. Bezos recently did a podcast with Lex Freeman, and there's some just great moments in that podcast when he breaks out why working in memos is distinctly different and more powerful than PowerPoint or just having conversations about things.
What do these memos look like? Because I can imagine what they look like, but give us a flavor for what one of these memos would look like.
Yeah, so we broke it down into really three core memos. The first is what we call the what sucks memo, right? This is the problem, and getting super clear about the real problem that your customer has, or your operator, or your employee, or your partner has, and getting below the surface or the easy answer to that, trying to get to the real root cause. Like, what's the job that they are trying to get done? We call it the what sucks. What's the real what sucks for them? The second memo is the hypothesis of what's the killer feature that would solve for this specific what sucks. And we think this combination of a singular problem statement and a singular killer feature really helps to differentiate a new value proposition. And then in that same memo, what you do is you outline the 3 to 5 things that would have to be true in order to deliver that killer feature. Well, those things become the things that need to be experimented later on down the road. And then the third memo is the financial outcome memo, or we also call it the juice memo, right? Is the juice worth the squeeze? And it focuses not just on a business case, but how do we actually use a target income statement and cost model to identify the high risk things that would have to be true about our financial model in order to deliver a delightful business based off of the problem statement in the future, and understanding that your financial case needs to be part of your experimentation log. So those are really the three memos to start with. And the writing and debating is best done as a small team with time framed constraints. On one hand, we're encouraging you to think deeper and harder before we get started. And on the other hand, we have to be careful about analysis paralysis. And so we're always putting in place kind of these counter mechanisms, because the second big bet legend habit is maintain velocity. Speed to getting through this is an essential aspect of how to test and prove these things out in a safe manner. So we're always putting constraints to these.
I love that. And what's interesting about it is it's this iterative process. So you do write the memo, which is like, okay, this is our first stab at this. What sucks? What's our hypothesis and the killer feature? 3 to 5 things that would have to be true to make this happen. The financials, right? So this is like we're 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 staking our claim, right?
That's right.
What I like about it is that oftentimes that's it. Sometimes that's all that comes from senior management is like, we're going to do this, and then it just cascades, and there's not that iterative process.
That is the classic mistake that gets made. Is they have a very fuzzy notion to the problem we're solving. They have an even fuzzier notion of like where the future is, and they commit to it. They commit to it internally. They commit to it externally. And that is the classic, especially digital transformations, for some reason, love this type of unclear thinking. And I'm here to tell you that big bet legends do not suffer from a lack of crystal clear understanding of the problem that has to be solved and what their hypothesis is. And that's why create clarity is the first of the habits that has to be instantiated.
One of the things I see when I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about the culture and the organization that is good at things like this is the behaviors of leadership. Like, there has to be a level of humility in leadership to be able to say, this is what I think we should do, but I want your ideas. I want your feedback. I want this iterative process, because the guy in the corner office does not have all the answers. That's a little bit of humility, right? I mean, is that what you see in the leaders that make these big bets?
It is, and that's why language is so important, and why I think a word like this situation is a bet versus I have an investment I'm making, I have a project I'm doing, something like that. Separate those two out, because when you say something's a bet, what you're signaling is, I think this is a good idea, but there's risk around it, right? Like we have to experiment that. And so that's why wording can be so critical in the culture and creating this safe and vulnerable place. Because if we use a common language around this, then I know, like, hey, I am operating and I should have high precision, high accuracy, high forecasting, versus a bet. What's the exact opposite of that, right? Well, if I have good language and then good technique that separates those, hey, I'm creating an environment that helps everybody be successful at their job and understand the game that we're playing at this moment.
And so you're saying, the other thing you're saying in the book is that these ideas, which some of it has a basis from Amazon, they work well in other companies, right? You mentioned T-Mobile, I believe. Yeah.
This is so I left Amazon in 2005. In some ways, this is the almost 20 years worth of major transformations that I've worked with and studied. I've been a student of leadership for change. Like that's what my focus on is, leadership for major corporate transformations. And so yes, this is a lot of it is borrowed from Amazon, but I tell the stories from the Gates Foundation and T-Mobile and other stories that we have to help us be way more dramatically more successful at these than they tend to be.
So what generally the people that have read the book, it's brand new, it's a new book. What's the feedback that you've heard so far? The people that are reading this, what are their aha moments? Really stands out for them?
um how both inspirationally and tactical it is. Like, and the thing we did with the book was we didn't want it to suffer from TLDR, too long didn't read. And so while we describe these memos and we give vivid examples and stories, we offload the exact memo template and things like that. So at bigbetleadership.com, you get a big bet journal, which has all the memos and the checklist to help you put all of this into play. We have a pre-flight checklist, which is again a rubric as to evaluate either a current big bet or one that you're coming into. We have a big bet GPT, which coupled with the prompts that we provide really acts as a thought partner and as a rapid iterator. But you cannot outsource the thinking to GPT, to chat GPT or anything like that, but it can be a pretty powerful tool for helping you see different iterations and to recognize opportunities. Communication is a critical element throughout the book. We have a dedicated chapter about how to write destination postcards. And a destination postcard is a concept from a really good book called Switch: How to Change When Change is Hard. But what we've equipped these destination postcards with is that big bet vector. Again, make your destination postcard vivid with, here's the problem we're solving, here's our hypothesis as to the future state, and then here's the journey we're on. We're testing it, or we've proven this, or we're adjusting. If being short and concise, and then your job is to be the chief repeating officer, the CRO, right? Again and again and again. And if there's one thing I learned from Bezos, is his strategic communication was an absolute masterclass. So for example, I worked on the same floor as Jeff, and we were launching the marketplace business, which was the big bet for Amazon back then. And he would stop by and he wouldn't ask me a question like, how's it going, John? Well, that's a very vague question, and everything. He would ask me, John, can a third party register in the middle of the night, fulfill an item, and delight a customer as though Amazon the retailer? Well, now that was our value proposition. That was our killer feature. And so he would be asking me a very specific question again and again and again. And he kept us all, keeping the main thing is a real power move if you can do it correctly. But that type of specific, clear, future-oriented, and simple, clear messaging is an absolute superpower for making these changes happen. And so we give a lot of tools and examples like that to help you do your job in driving change.
I absolutely love that you focus so much effort on communication. And by the way, thank you for saying chief repeating officer, because I think we think one and done, you're done in leadership, and it's not that way. It's not that way with marketing. It's not that way with it. Look, if you, I always say this: if you're going to put a lot of work into a plan, you need to put double that into communicating that plan, because it takes people to make things happen. So you have to keep your people informed, and they aren't going to realize something is important until you say it 7 times, 8 times.
And they're bombarded with messages. They're hard to remember. That's why we do this in a story format, because stories are 22 times more memorable than simple facts or figures. But you need to do it 10 times more than you think is necessary. Not just a little bit more, but 10 times more. And then you're starting to get this sunk into people's psyche of like, oh, here's what we are doing. Here's the future that we are creating. And then you've given everybody the appropriate understanding to either contribute to the change or be ready for the change.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. And I do like the idea too. You talk about clarity, velocity, and I think the last thing you said was value, maintaining value.
Well, the third critical habit is accelerate risk and value, deferring out as much else as possible. And this is probably the hardest one to wrap heads around, because what this is about is it's about true enterprise agility. It's about bringing the high value, high risk things that need to be tested, doing those first, deferring out other things. Well, sometimes, what we typically do is most of our projects are run like you're climbing a mountain, right? Like, well, you have to start at the bottom and then you go to base camp and then you go to the summit. Well, what I'm suggesting is, no, we need to figure out how to test those high risk things that are at the summit, flip the script and bring those early before we spend a bunch of time and money building our way all the way up the mountain. Well, that takes clever experiment design and a real understanding of there's a difference between high risk versus hard things, right? High risk things tend to be those things that are slightly outside of our control. So for example, my customer acquisition cost is something that might be slightly outside of my control. How my channel adapts to a major, product or pricing or subscription change is something that's slightly outside of my control. Well, how do I test that out up front and defer all the other work that needs to get done once I've tested it out? That takes clever design, and we have a lot of material in the book, and we refer to some other good material in the book about kind of that, experiment design for businesses.
I love this. Such powerful information that we're talking about in this conversation, John. I really appreciate it. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners on this topic?
Well, to some degree we've covered it, but it's just a reemphasis that I think the biggest risk is just proceeding with the next incremental thing. So each chapter I start with is a quote that I think kind of, I try to use kind of non-overused quotes, so some hidden quotes, and once it kind of capture the spirit of the chapter. And so my favorite one, and it's the favorite because it's the thing that I suffer from the most in my career that I have to remind myself in. And so the quote is from Michelangelo, who's a 15th century, artisan and Renaissance man. And he goes, "The greater danger for most of us lies in not setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark." And I would just, if you approach this think big but bet small mentality, which is the name of that particular chapter, you can be successful at chartering a completely different course that future proofs not just your business or your team, but your career.
That's fantastic. How much do we need this in this world with so much change going on right now? It's such an important topic, and again, we can learn from the companies that are doing it well, and we can put them in our companies. And just because you're a small to mid-sized business doesn't mean that this is not applicable to you. It is applicable to you. In fact,
To
yeah,
me, I hear that's an excuse.
yeah,
And I will not accept that excuse. The technology is hard, but it is not the hardest part. And we've become so good at abstracting out all the complexity. If you can be better at specifying this big bet vector, then you can affordably hire the technologists to build and test that big bet vector. But it's when we don't do the hard work of really understanding what we're trying to solve, all this technology stuff becomes really twisted and open for interpretation by others. So your job is to create this firm understanding of the problem in the future state, and then engage with the technologists or whatever changes you need to make.
absolutely love that. And again, if you look at the top companies in the United States, they have changed dramatically in the
Oh,
last 30 years. It's not the same companies that existed 30 years ago on the Dow Jones or whatever. It's these top companies have shifted. It's because other companies have made big bets and have been really successful in those bets. So we
that's
need to
absolutely
be
right.
in our companies as well. So this is a valuable episode for all of you leaders that are listening in right now. This has been fantastic. How can our listeners find out more about you, John, your company, and all of your books, but also this book?
Yeah, so you can go to johnrossman.com to learn about me and my books. You can go to Amazon and see all four of my books, and then bigbetleadership.com, and you can download these resources for free. I do think having the book is important to get the most out of the resources, but the resources are there for free.
Absolutely. And one of the things that John mentioned, and we kind of skimmed over it, it is he has made it short, and you can read it and you can understand it. It's less than 180 pages, which is what I love about people who are writing business books that want to get things done. It's not about theory. It's not about looking smart. It's about you reading and getting this done. It's about implementing the ideas in the book. That's why it's written short. And not only that, on his website, he's got all the tools you need.
The other thing I'd mention is, because we took a lot of the hard lifting work out of the book, the narration on the audiobook is just fantastic. So it's a fantastic listen to. That's how I consume most of my books. We had a great voice actor to do it. And so, whether you read it or listen to it, it's a really fast, crisp read to get through.
I love it. We're going to put the links in the show notes for all of John's resources, especially the book. And again, audiobooks, guys, that's a way to do it. What are you doing? We talked about it in past podcasts. Are you eating mental cupcakes in your car driving to work? Or are you learning and getting better, right? Don't eat cupcakes, eat some good, healthy food. And this book would be
love that metaphor.
Would be a great
Avoid
healthy
the junk
food. So no mental cupcakes. Read this book, listen to this book on your way to work, get better at what you're doing. John, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing what you're doing. Congratulations on the book so far. And thanks for promoting this idea, because I think it's really vital for all of our businesses.
Well, thank you for sharing your platform with me, and I appreciate all the work you've done.
Well, thank you. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.